Hello friends, this is part 2 of my little series about different art styles and how to recognize them. Specifically, in this case, we're covering arts and crafts, Art Nouveau, and Art Deco, which seem to be three that are a little confusing, probably because they have almost the same name, but they're kind of not the same. So, in the first video, we talked about arts and crafts and the English arts and crafts movement that eventually also came to the US and Scotland and, sort of permeated elsewhere as well. And towards the end of that, certain branches of it started to morph into what came to be known as the Art Nouveau style, or Art Nouveau in French. It was also called Stile Liberty in Italy. It was called some variation on modernism or modernisme in a lot of countries. It was called Jugendstil in Austria and Germany, and a variation on that in Holland, and in something similar in the Scandinavian countries. That is to say, it was a very international style, and it really dates from the 1890 to World War I, and it doesn't go past that. It overlaps a lot and was influenced a lot by the arts and crafts movement, and some of the artists are known for one are also sort of known for the other. So let me just cruise through some brief history / examples / whatever about it and see if it helps to make it more recognizable. So in my last video with arts and crafts, I showed you some work of Margaret MacDonald Mackintosh and her husband Charles Rennie Mackintosh, her sister Frances MacDonald McNair. I think they're a really important part of the story. They were working in Glasgow. They went to the Glasgow School of Art, and they were initially working in and were extremely influenced by the arts and crafts movement and philosophy. But aesthetically, I think they kind of started to invent a whole new language. And this is Frances's work. This is Margaret's work. And you can see they've totally abandoned the idiom of the arts and crafts aesthetic, and they've taken it somewhere really swirly and rounded, and with decoration for decoration's sake. It's not, I'm not saying it's dishonest, but it's not the kind of honesty where like the decoration is a dowel because you need a dowel to make the chair hold together. It's got, it's got roses, it's got texture, it's got all kinds of surface decoration. And these shapes are really important. These really are indicative of what Art Nouveau became. Even we have Walter Crane here. This is his work down here. He was pretty closely associated with the English arts and crafts movement and Morris and Co. But his work, again, it's like their work in a lot of ways, but it also starts to take on this swirly vegetal flourishy shape. I think that really leads into the next sort of aesthetic wave. And same with, this is Eugène Vernoy, often known as Eugène Pillard Vernoy, and this is his work over here. He did some fabulous patterns and animal depictions. They're really cool. But in this one, for example, you see again what I would call Art Nouveau. We got all these swirly lines and all these vegetal shapes that are decorative. A lot of these lines are what would later be called the whiplash. They kind of go And they have a movement to them, even though this is flat and it has no shading and it's not 3D. It has a certain kind of movement, or what they would call dynamism. And same here, this is not a realistic depiction, although there is some shading and stuff, but it's got movement in its forms. And I'm just showing you again, this is a panel from Whistler's Peacock Room. There's Mr. Whistler over here. And this again shows the influence of Japanese art, or Japanismo. And it's got these long, sinuous forms, and it's a lot of verticality. This has a lot of asymmetricality, and it's very decorative. It's not afraid to be more than just the basic flat thing. It can be that extremely beautified. And so you see the influence of the aesthetic movement there as well. This piece is by Margaret MacDonald again, and I just stuck it here to remind me to tell you that one thing that they took from the arts and crafts movement and continued to be even more important in the Art Nouveau branch of it, is this unity of the arts. So the idea is that a painting or a piece of furniture or a vase or architecture or clothing or some, a teapot or something totally utilitarian, they all can be art. There's no high and low. There's no only oil paintings can be exhibited at the Academy stuff. Art can be on part of all things and should be. Your environment should be beautiful. The objects you use can be beautiful. And I think this piece is cool because it exemplifies that real arts and crafts style with the brass straps that are, throwback medieval and are like show the honesty of form. Like, this is a hinge. It is a hinge, but it's also a beautiful hinge, and it's a decorated hinge, and it's got these beautiful unnecessary panels here. So I think it's a nice in-between piece. And in Art Nouveau, they weren't afraid to use new materials and technologies. In arts and crafts, it was more about the old style and doing things in an artisanal way and going back to letterpress printing, even though there was the beginnings of offset lithography and things going on, and using woodblock printing for wallpaper, even though you could print it in a more mass-produced way and all of that. But in Art Nouveau, they weren't afraid to use new materials or technologies or to make it all modern and current and relevant. And if something needed to be mass-produced to bring beauty to the masses, then that's how they did it. And a few other things that I just noted to tell you are to note that although there is symmetry in some of these earlier pieces, the real hallmark is asymmetry, like in this piece here and even here. Also a lot of use of pattern. These aren't just realistic flowers. These are a pattern of this plant. A lot of vegetal forms. That was very important. I mean, if it wasn't a peacock, it was a plant or a beautiful woman or a beautiful boy. Color palettes in Art Nouveau are not realistic necessarily. I mean, not just that, peacocks aren't gold, but, people had green hair or whatever. It was more in the service of the look than trying to look real. It was more the feeling. All right, so the beginnings of the movement in the early 1890s, this staircase here is often cited. This is part of a building in Belgium by the architect Victor Horta over here, and it is totally amazing. It's uses light and shadow and all these crazy whiplash forms, and it's fabulous. This is sort of considered the beginning of Art Nouveau architecture. And stuff like this down here followed quickly, and stuff like this down here followed quickly by Mr. Guimard here. You see in the balcony all these Art Nouveau forms and this asymmetry of the facade and the shape of the sign. I mean, that is not a rectilinear arts and crafts sign anymore. We're going totally flowy. This over here is an illustration by Mr. Aubrey Beardsley, and he is an early English Art Nouveau chap, specifically with his illustrations. And this is a famous early Art Nouveau piece. This is a theater poster for Sarah Bernhardt by Alphonse Mucha over here. He was Czech or Bohemian, and he may be, no pun intended, sort of the poster child of Art Nouveau, or a certain branch of it. His work is incredibly famous. You'll see it reproduced endlessly everywhere. And I mean, he was amazing, but there were also other things going on in Art Nouveau that were great too. So this is sort of the genesis of his look that you'll recognize some of his work. A big highlight of Art Nouveau, and a lot of people say it was the peak, was the Exposition Universelle in Paris in 1900. And for that, Hector Guimard designed the iconic Art Nouveau metro station in Paris. And Mucha did, this is a menu, but he did some, promotional artwork for the exposition. These weren't necessarily in the exposition, but they're of that era. Gallet was designing all kinds of cool stuff, and Dome Nancy was designing all kinds of cool stuff like glassware and so forth okay. At this point, Art Nouveau was considered the international modern style, and people were doing it everywhere, and it was exploding into different variations, and people were doing, different innovations and so forth. I just wanted to sort of highlight how this went everywhere and influenced all kinds of arts. Here's a graphic piece from Belgium, and Belgium really was one of the places Art Nouveau started. Really, it was Belgium and France, and then, Beardsley was working in England, but that was sort of a lesser, if I can say such a thing, branch. And there was tons of stuff going on in Austria. There was the Vienna Secessionists. There was the people who would go on to do something totally different later, which sort of foreshadows Deco, but the Wiener Werkstatt and the people who would go on to work in Bauhaus and so forth. But tons going on in Austria. This is by Gustav Klimt, who you no doubt know. He is a very iconic painter, the Art Nouveau style. This piece is by Leon Bakst, and it's a program for the Ballet Russe, who early on had a lot of Art Nouveau costume design and influence. They later went on to be very Art Deco, but that's another story. And that was in Russia. In the US, Louis Comfort Timpany was going gangbusters with all kinds of decorative arts and stained glass and all kinds of things in Art Nouveau style. This is a René Lalique necklace from France, and he again went on to embrace Art Deco, but at this point he was doing some very cool Art Nouveau stuff. And then just a few other random things. I don't know these artists off the top of my head, but some architecture in Czechoslovakia and Argentina and Italy and Mexico. It was everywhere, and people were doing amazing, innovative things, pushing the envelope in all sorts of art forms. Very cool. So I just want to show you a few more iconic images. This piece here and this piece here are both by Mucha, and this one is so famous. This is everywhere. As you can see, A lot of Art Nouveau was used in commercial work, posters, postcards, magazines, illustrations, ads, whatever. It was not, there wasn't that high low differentiation. There could be a beautiful building or a beautiful ecclesiastical stained glass window, but there could also be an ad for biscuits, which is what this is. The concert flyer type thing. I love this piece. And here's Beardsley again. Here's a poster by Henri Toulouse-Lautrec, and he is generally considered to be Art Nouveau, although he was, again, a little different branch, but his forms and exaggerations and the flat color palette, the sinewy lines, it is ultimately Art Nouveau, and it did have an influence on other artists. Here's another Folie Bergère poster that, again, it has, this is a little different. It doesn't have the, vegetable wavy lines, but it does have all this dynamism and the swirls and so forth. So that's a bit of a different style. Here's a cover of Harper's. I just think this is the best thing ever, so I thought I'd show you. That's by Penfield, I believe. This is a book cover by McMurdo, and like it's so great because it's about Christopher Wren's architecture, and this, that couldn't be far further from Art Nouveau, but this cover couldn't be a better exemplar. So they're just a few, just throwing out a few more cool pieces, and there's so much. I mean, there were Vogue magazine covers that were absolutely fabulous, and all kinds of magazines, books, ads, you name it. And high art, like, your Klimt and your, or even Egon Schiele and so forth. So a few examples of Art Nouveau in the wild where you might find it. This is sheet music, and this is so Art Nouveau. I mean, there's a lot of Art Nouveau sheet music. It's pretty easy to come by, and it's often, quite beautiful, I have to say. Down here is another Art Nouveau sheet music, and this woman is so Art Nouveau with her orange hair and her swirly lines and this border. Like, if you see this kind of border anywhere, Art Nouveau. Here is a vase, and here you can see the arts and crafts influence in the way the metal and the glass interact and the sort of honesty of materials, but the form is long and sinuous and has these swirls and whiplashes, and it's totally Art Nouveau. And this is actually, all of these things were things that were for sale on eBay, and they weren't terribly expensive, so this is totally stuff you can find. This is actually a napkin ring of all utilitarian objects, but again, all those same forms of vegetal forms and the swirls, and there you go. Here's a postcard, and this one, may not be as obvious. It has this photographic piece, and she's Edwardian. You can tell by her hair. She's like a Gibson girl, but there's not that much in her clothes because she's like not wearing any clothes. Though she does have this kind of Japanese influence wrap or towel or whatever on. But these flowers and even these shapes here are pretty Art Nouveau. But you can see in this, like, there's that arts and crafts Art Nouveau line. It's not that clearly drawn. Here is an ad, just a black and white ad from some magazine for a pair of soap, and look at this Art Nouveau border, and even just the style of this woman. It's totally commercial. I mean, high art, low art, whatever. Here's a copy of Harper's. Yeah, this wasn't on eBay. But I just wanted to show you an Art Nouveau guy, because they do exist. There's a real emphasis on sinewy women, but there are guys sometimes too, and they're often kind of young and pretty, and just these colors and the type and these flowers, it's all very nice. And here's a couple other magazine covers. This one I think is quite hard to find, but it's really cool. It has a very Mucha influence. I don't think it's by him. Oh, and this postcard, again, you know, it has the photo, so she's neither here nor there. She looks to be wearing fairly conventional sort of 1900 dress of some sort, but her frame and these letters, I mean, this is so like Toulouse-Lautrec typography, and the shape of this, I don't know what's up with these weird duck viper things, and the patterns and stuff is it's a very Art Nouveau. So that is my very quick rush through Art Nouveau, and I should say that it ended quite abruptly with World War One. All of a sudden, all this decoration and beauty seemed frivolous, and it just fell out of fashion like a hotcake. it had a sort of meteoric rise and burned bright and burned out. 1890, 1914, even 1910, really, it was on the outs. But it's a really cool and distinctive style. It's the first time that an international style really took over and fired up everyone's imagination everywhere, and this new modern look just sort of exploded on the world stage. So in that way, it's really cool, and I hope that you find some Art Nouveau treasures out there, and that this was a helpful whirlwind tour. Please do like and thumbs up and subscribe and all that stuff. And also, if you're watching this in anything close to realish time, I am planning a live Q&A video coming up. So if you have any cues for me, please leave them in the comments below. It doesn't need to be about Art Nouveau or anything like that. It can be about whatever, as long as it's something I may know the answer to. That will be coming up at a yet undecided date, but please start leaving me questions whenever you think of them so I can have something to talk about. All right, thank you so much and take care.